A rollback of child labor protections cleared its first hurdle in the Florida ahead of Florida's legislative session, which gets underway 1 week from today. House Bill 49 would eliminate most work restrictions for 16 and 17-year-olds. The bill's sponsor says it will provide needed labor for a depleted workforce, but some observers are worried it will impact the education and safety of children. Joining me today, Jacksonville labor and employment attorney James Poindexter.
Good
Thanks for
morning.
being here. And Dr. Jeffrey Goldhagen, professor of pediatrics at the University of Florida College of Medicine-Jacksonville and its chief of its division of community pediatrics.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
And to our listeners, do you know a teenager who could be impacted by these changes? What labor protections were in place for your first job? We want to hear from you. Give us a call at 549-2937. Email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Message us on Facebook and Instagram or tag us on X at FCC On Air. James Poindexter, currently there are specific prohibitions on child labor in Florida. What are those laws and why were they put in place?
Sure. So it goes back to early in the 20th century, really, when child labor laws were first put in place to protect children who were being forced into labor by very dangerous industries, both in the farm labor industry, the meatpacking industry, and they've been developed over time. Florida's laws are not very onerous for minors 15 and under. It basically says you can't work before 7 a.m. and after 7 p.m. and on days before school's in session, and restricts 16 and 17-year-olds to 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. On days before school's in session, and then limits them to 30 hours a week when school's in session and 40 hours a week when school's not in session. So, and then there's a 30-minute break after 4 hours of continuous work. These are not overly onerous laws, but they do put in place certain protections that encourage health and safety of children and allow them to be educated.
And Dr. Goldhagen, why are those protections important for children? What is different about children that they need special protections?
Well, clearly, children are in a period of developmental stages. They need to be educated. They need different forms of leisure and play. They need not to be exposed to significant hazards. They need not to be exploited. And let's be sure that, in fact, from one perspective, they may not be too onerous, but from another perspective, if you take a look at children who are working, they're primarily low income, they're primarily minority. They are, in fact, the children that need to be in after-school programs, that need to be in school, need not to be working significant hours during the week. And so all of this is really a reflection of a degree of significant racism and oppression of children. The idea that we need children in order to fill a labor shortage ought to be raise the concerns by everyone.
So the House bill that's currently going before the legislature was introduced by Representative Linda Cheney. She's a Republican lawmaker from St. Pete Beach. And the bill would basically remove all guidelines regulating when 16 and 17-year-olds can work. There is also there's not a companion bill yet in the Senate, and her bill would still need to clear a couple of committees. But there is a parallel bill in the Senate. It's Senate Bill 460, filed by Senator Corey Simon from Tallahassee. It would allow children ages 16 and 17 to have some rather hazardous job occupations, including roofing and working on scaffolding at construction sites. That particular bill is being backed by the Associated Builders and Contractors and Florida's Home Builders Association. James Poindexter, those are two powerful lobbying groups in Florida.
They are, but not as powerful as federal law, which currently prohibits children from working in roofing industries specifically as a hazardous industry in which kids cannot work. So there's going to be a supremacy issue with federal law and regulations overriding any changes that they would try to make to state law with that regard. And I believe that the bill's sponsor has already acknowledged that it may need amendment in order to comply with federal law.
How does that work out? I mean, explain to our listeners if something conflicts with an existing federal protection for a child.
Right. So we are in a federalist government system. States are allowed to self-govern unless their laws conflict with a federal statute or a federal regulation, in which case The Supremacy Clause states that the federal government's law is supreme. Now, could a federal law be challenged or a federal regulation be challenged? Certainly, it happens every day of the week. But at least as the law stands right now, the Occupational Safety and Health Act currently prohibits children from working in roofing.
Dr. Goldhagen, one of the narratives that backs this bill is that there is that there's a labor shortage, period, in Florida, possibly exacerbated by Florida's recent crackdown on migrants in general, who often hold jobs in, for instance, agriculture or low-wage jobs in restaurants. The Chamber of Commerce has put out some numbers that say that right now Florida has 53 workers for every 100 open jobs. They say that's among the most severe rates in the country. And the bill's sponsor says that the regulations that she wants to eliminate are outdated and lagging behind modern learning architectures. They're overly restrictive. We should say we did reach out to both the Senate and the House bill sponsors. We haven't yet heard back.
Well, just think about what Cheney is saying. She's saying that, in fact, we have a labor shortage. Therefore, we need to remove the protections for children, allow children to work in dangerous situations, allow children to work excessive hours in order to fill a labor shortage. She also said that, if you read what her statements are, that this will teach children skills and provide them opportunities that they otherwise would not have had. It's the same echo of DeSantis' statement about enslaved people, that slavery taught slaves or enslaved people new skills. This is a political agenda that is consistent with the ongoing assault on children, whether it's removing Medicaid, whether it's removing access to SNAP and food, whether it's anti-LGBTQ, whether it's book banning. This is a continued assault across the country that has its foundations here in Florida. The Foundation for Government Accountability, which is centered here in Florida, wrote all of the child labor laws that are coming into effect across the country. They're also lobbying against SNAP. They're also lobbying against many of the support systems for low-income and minority people. This is a political agenda that is a pernicious assault on children.
We have a message from a listener on X who says, which children will this harm the most? I'm going to guess wealthy suburban children are not working night shifts. Isn't this just hatred and indifference of the poor? We also have a call, Javon from Tampa. Good morning, Javon. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning, and I would echo the statement from the person on Twitter that Ron DeSantis and Cheney's kids aren't going to be the ones who are going to be taking these jobs. It's going to be poor kids, black, white, brown, who are going to be put in dangerous situations. And this is a national epidemic where children as young as 14 and 15 are going into meatpacking plants. And laws like these just make it all that much easier for young people to be doing dangerous kinds of work. I, in particular, work for a labor union, and we have literally shed blood as a country to prevent our children from ending up in meatpacking plants and coal mines. And more, it seems like that's where we're trying to get back to. Not because we have, and this is all because they don't want to pay good wages. Meanwhile, we have record corporate profits.
Thanks so much for your thoughts, Javon. Appreciate it. James Poindexter, this is actually coming at a time when the Biden administration has been promising to crack down on labor law violations. There have been a number of really high-profile investigations into kids being put to work in dangerous situations. The New York Times has done a number of deep dives on this.
Yeah, and when we saw that, during the pandemic, there was a crackdown on the meatpacking industry where we had 100 children between the ages of 13 and 17 cleaning sharp blades in the middle of the night in a meatpacking factory. Several of them were seriously injured. And according to the Economic Policy Institute, in the last year, there's been a 37% increase in child labor, and since 2015, a 283% increase. So we're seeing already illicit child labor being used to fill what's being pitched as a labor shortage. And really, this is also part of a larger assault on education, too. I mean, a lot of the reason, and from reading the statute that's in place, The law is intended to permit children to go to school. How does a child go to school if they're working 40, 50 hours a week, not just in a sedentary job, but working on a roof or working in the construction trades and able to still go to school? This encourages students to drop out of high school. It encourages them to enter the workforce before they've gotten a complete education. And I'd like to point out that the statute actually already provides several exclusions and exemptions that students can apply for if they do leave school, if they do drop out and they want to enter the workforce, they can apply for an exemption. So this takes the exception and turns it into the rule.
I want to take a call now from Representative Angie Nixon. Good morning, Representative Nixon. You introduced a number of amendments to this that were not successful.
Yes, I definitely did. One of which would have allowed for parents to be notified of any sexual harassment that may have taken place at the job site. And this comes, my amendment came right off the backs of an issue that just took place in Jacksonville at a Zaxby's, where one of the managers was a registered sex offender, actually recently got arrested because he was taking pictures of underage kids. And I do really want to highlight that the sponsor of the bill, Representative Cheney, also stated that 16 and 17-year-olds are not children. She was very adamant in regards to that. And to what Mr. Poindexter stated earlier, he's right. As it relates to, I'm sorry, I have a baby in the background.
Sorry.
I've got a couple of those at home too.
He was right as it relates to this is simply a group of people, the Republicans in the state legislature, who, they passed SB 1718 last year, the anti-immigration law, and they saw a decrease in workers, and so now they want to bring on cheap labor, and it's going to be at the detriment of our children, particularly as the doctor stated, Black and brown children and low-income children, and I'm really fearful of what's going to happen.
Thank you, Representative Nixon. We really appreciate your thoughts. Jeffrey Goldhagen.
Yeah, there's another side to this. That is the people who are employing these young people. And the Restaurant and Lodging Association, including Walt Disney World, are pushing for this, supporting this bill. And so that's another group that we really need to look at as contributing to this pernicious child labor issue. And we know, as you said, from the expose from the New York Times, that in fact, despite the laws that exist, that there are thousands and thousands of children employed by these companies, I should say exploited by these companies. And one can imagine, if you went down and looked at the construction industry in South Florida that's been hit by the hurricanes, that there are many, many children that are on those roofs and on those construction sites. There are a handful of inspectors in the state of Florida, only a handful to, basically oversee tens of thousands of businesses and organizations that could and are using these children as employees.
Got a call, John from Riverside. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we have hordes of people at our southern border escaping desperate situations that would be more than happy to fill these positions. The idea that we're going to create massive suffering on the border while we put children at risk is absolutely ridiculous. If we had a reasonable immigration policy with guest workers and things like that, we wouldn't have a labor problem. Who dreams of having their child be the Motel 8 maid? We don't want these jobs. Let them in, fill them up. But, let the kids go to school and let them get a good night's sleep.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your call. We're talking about a proposed rollback of child labor laws in Florida. Join our conversation at 549-2937. Email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Message us on Facebook or Instagram, or tag us on X at FCC On Air. James Poindexter, earlier caller made a point about the number of hours that a child could work, still can work under current existing laws. And you think about when you went to school, whether it was maybe even college, most people aren't working full-time jobs and going to college. It really is difficult to try to manage getting an education while working many, many hours in a week.
It is, and I mean, I can speak from personal experience. When I was in college, I worked a part-time job at a law firm filing paper. I was exhausted. It was only 10, 15 hours a week in addition to my studies. I did it throughout law school as well. I can't imagine being on a hot roof in Florida, changing shingles, and then having to get up on a Monday morning and go to work or go to school. It would just be oppressive.
And one of the protections that's currently in place for 16 and 17-year-olds is they can't work an 8-hour shift before school. I mean, that's kind of one of the baseline protections that it offers. It's hard to imagine working an 8-hour shift, particularly, physical labor of some kind, and then trying to begin your day.
It's impossible to imagine that. And if you flip the perspective, those 8 hours for these young people should be spent studying and advancing themselves from an educational standpoint. Although it's legal, the fast food industry in many ways is the largest exploiter of children and young people. They say they're giving young people a chance to learn a skill. What they're doing is they're taking these young people, they're putting them into high-risk situations, they're paying them less than they would otherwise have to pay, taking up their time instead of being in school. If you have less than a C average, you can't play high school sports, but you can go work at McDonald's for many, many hours. And these fast food companies have actually been found to be guilty and have been fined for violations of child labor. So it's not just this one particular law that we're concerned about, or at least that I'm concerned about. It's the general exploitation of black and brown and low-income children in this country, and it needs to stop.
And the irony is that the legislature just recently pushed back the start of the school day, acknowledging that students need more sleep in order to be successful from a health perspective. And now we're saying, okay, but let them work those hours instead. It's ludicrous.
It's a good point, because whether or not you can shoehorn in a certain number of hours for work, just because you're able to do it doesn't necessarily mean that you have that time. When you think about things like extracurricular activities or just downtime or playing with their friends or whatever it may be, that there are just a limited number of hours in the day.
And construction jobs can be lucrative. You can make a good living on a job site, and that can operate as a magnet and lure students away from school, encouraging them to drop out in order to take these jobs.
Now, you alluded, Jeffrey Goldhagen, earlier to some changes that are taking place around the country. This is a Florida-based group that has been writing, in some cases, the proposed legislation. It's called the Foundation for Government Accountability. It's based in Southwest Florida, and they have pushed bills successfully elsewhere. In Iowa now, 16 and 17-year-olds can now work the same hours as adults. They can serve alcohol in restaurants. They can operate heavy machinery, and they can do work that was previously banned. That includes working in industrial laundry services, working in freezers and meat coolers.
14 and 15-year-olds can do the meat coolers. 14 and 15-year-olds can work in meatpacking industry, in the meat coolers, in industrial laundries. The 16 and 17-year-olds, they've eliminated essentially all work requirements and lifted them all.
Arkansas also voted last year to eliminate work permits and age verification for workers younger than 16.
Right. So once again, this is part of a national political agenda that for some reason in this country is focused on children. We beat them more than any other country. We incarcerate them. We steal their brains in low performing early childhood centers. We take the food away from them in SNAP. We eliminate their access to Medicaid coverage. We ban books in schools. We are assaulting public schools. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see the pattern of this pernicious assault on children that has continued and will continue primarily from a far right-wing agenda.
And James Poindexter, what is it about this legislative session that you think people should be watching for? I mean, there is obviously a path that this has to go through. There's an opportunity for people to have their voices heard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it just got out of its first committee, I believe, just before the holidays. It was completely upon partisan lines. All Republicans of the committee voted for it. All Democrats voted against it. The next step would be looking for a Senate companion bill for it, or maybe an amendment to the current Senate bill to follow the House bill. But I would encourage everyone, call your state representative to the extent that they're willing to listen and make your voice heard, because, you know, we saw this with the Don't Say Gay bill, where it started with a small change that only affected K through third grade. And as soon as it went into law, it expanded all the way through 12th grade. So there is an idea that we can, 16 and 17-year-olds are old enough to work. And then perhaps right after it comes the other shoe, and it expands and eliminates all of these laws. So.
Well, and the legislation, I'm looking at it here now, has changed the word shall to may for every piece of the legislation that relates to 14 and 15-year-olds, with the expectation then that it will eliminate all protections for all children by the use of the word may rather than shall.
That's a great point.
Well, thanks to James Poindexter and Dr. Jeffrey Goldhagen for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it.